Welcome to welcome to the Work and Worldview podcast.
Thanks.
So the way you spoke about um, audio was really interesting to me, like particularly vocal, right? You
Mhm,
talked about having vocal first, and then you build everything around it. So being a religious guy, I'm always experiencing metaphors, right?
mhm.
I was immediately thinking like, wow, that's like Christianity, the Bible, like I need to put that in the center and build everything around it because if I turn up everything else, it's just gonna get squeezed out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I
That's
had that
very
I saw that happen over and over again when I was an assistant, and it was just like, "This just doesn't seem to be the smart move."
so you gradually came to realize that, or you eventually got to the point where you're able to lead and
Yeah,
do it your own way.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I assisted for a very long time, way more than most people, just because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing.
Right.
And, my last staff position, I was lovingly kicked out to, you know, "Fly, be free," kinda thing. It was like,
Right.
"Are you freaking kidding me?" I was not happy. But, 'cause how did I put it? I think I was like, "Wait a minute. So I've mastered audio, and now I have to learn business?" I was not cool with that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. That had to be because you had to start your own business, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and and I've had a few, and it's like, I still don't know anything. It just I'm just, I'm kinda a little like, almost like a little bit of a Peter Pan complex in that, like, I've never really, really had to be an adult and grow up with this stuff. I'm still the kid listening on my Koss headphones on my beanbag chair in my room. When I was a kid, I went to my record changer, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never really got past that, so which I love, which is awesome, but it does put me in some weird situations.
In what way? Just with business, you mean? Like running a business?
No, I mean, in many ways. I mean, business, culture, life. I never went to college. So, I basically went to high school. I went to like a tech school here in New York City. It was like a
Mhm.
9 month thing that was like more like how to build a console than really
Right.
anything about music. So that
Right.
really wasn't helpful. And I got a job before I even, halfway through the course.
Mhm.
So, I basically slept through the second half of the course because my first session ever was 24 hours long. And I had no, and I got my ass kicked like straight away. Didn't see it coming, had no idea I had read all the recording books at the time because there wasn't internet yet. So there were like 3 books in the library,
Yeah.
and you read those and you were like, you're ready. That was it. And I think there was Mix magazine and maybe one other one. And those are the only resources.
Well, let's back up a little bit. Where did you actually grow up? Where
Uh,
did you grow up?
Upstate New York,
Okay.
like
Okay.
2 hours north of New York City.
Okay.
There's all
Okay.
like farms and
It's like a
that kind of
rural
stuff.
rural area.
Yeah, rural, but at the same time, it was like the headquarters of IBM. So
Okay.
everybody's family, everybody's parents worked at IBM except my dad, who was a mechanic and owned his own shop.
Uh-huh.
So instantly the outsider. Woo! Um, so yeah.
And you mentioned, in the other interview, getting a reel to reel pretty early. That was your first recording?
Yeah, a
Right.
little like almost like toy one. Can't remember I don't know if it was like General Electric or
Yeah.
Montgomery Wards or one of those kinds of things.
Was it
And
white?
I think it was white and blue.
Mhm.
I think. I mean the reels were,
Right.
like 3.5, 4 inches.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm usually really good at remembering stuff like that, but I don't remember like the logo or anything or um I don't know. Maybe, but I still have the microphones from it.
Huh? Wow.
So, well,
They're probably pretty good quality built back then.
actually, no. What's funny is that like like I think the
Mm.
first real, like when I first started collecting gear, I think, like the first like real preamp I had was an Avalon 737, which was quite, it had been, and turned into a legendary box. But I remember even plugging one of those little microphones into that, and it was like, well, this just sounds good. I'd use this on a lot of things. The mic probably cost about 4 cents to make in like, 75, 74, 75. So, but I still have them, yeah. And they actually sounded better than you would think.
So what kind of music was influencing you then?
Uh, when I was a kid, I grew up in the 70s and it was all about those K-Tel records.
Mhm.
K-Tel had put out these compilations. They were like kind of like, because these were the days where you had a cassette player and you would, if you wanted to grab a song that you loved off the radio, you sat with your finger next to a record button,
Yep.
waiting
Yep.
for them to play the song so you could record it.
Yep.
So K-Tel put out these like kind of like radio compilations,
Mhm.
and me and my sister would sing along to hairbrushes to all those tunes, and knew every note of those records. And I remember getting a Donny Osmond record, and then it all changed in, I think it was 77, when I got, I don't know if that's for my birthday. I got Aerosmith, Draw the Line, and Styx Grand Illusion. And that
Aha.
and that was the end of that. I wore those records out completely. And then the third record I got was Queen's News of the World, which is
Mhm.
1978. And then it's all a blur since then. But those were the first three.
So was there a draw at that age to professional to going pro with recording and mixing,
No,
or was
no,
it just an interest that,
it
okay.
it it was just obsessed with the music because
Mhm.
there was no information then.
Mhm.
There were, I mean, there were those recording books, but I didn't read those until much later. But
Right.
there was like Rolling Stone magazine. There was a magazine called Circus. There was one called Cream, like Creem,
Mhm.
and that's how you found out about music. Like that's when you saw pictures of who you were listening to looked like.
Yep.
And it was
Yep.
pretty cheesy and all that. But there was no, you didn't, there wasn't anything on TV yet, or it was just you and the radio.
Sure.
And um and uh you get your, or you go buy the 45s,
Right.
when it came out, or the record, which was, then a whopping $5, you
Mhm.
know and
Mhm.
um and that's what it was. So it was just listening to that stuff over and over and over again. And I used to be a model builder, like planes and boats and stuff. So there's countless hours of me in my parents' basement listening to, classic rock. Well, they didn't even call it classic rock because it was still just rock then.
Mhm.
It wasn't classic yet. But listening to the songs of the day, and it was, every it was like Led Zeppelin, The Who, Leonard Skinner, Black Sabbath, uh, those were like the ones that were on like all the time. Or the
Mhm.
Eagles were huge, and they were on the radio constantly. And
PLJ, right?
this was upstate. This was WPDH.
Okay. Okay.
And then when I got a little older, I discovered Vassar college radio station, 92.3, to the left of the rest. And
That's
there was
clever.
this there was this DJ on there. Her name was Pam Casanova, and she had the sexiest voice ever. And she was playing, that's how I learned about The Cure and The
Mhm.
Cult and
Mhm.
Bauhaus and, New Order, and all that stuff. And it was like, who is this mystical creature? And
Yep.
I still have a lot of those early cassette tapes, and I still have a few of her radio shows on cassette. It would be very interesting to listen back. But yeah, just records, records, records. Then discovered the Clash,
Mhm.
That was a huge moment. The whole punk rock thing. Um, and I don't know if you ever remember, there was a book and then a movie out like 20 years ago called The High Fidelity. I think
Hmm.
John Cusack was in the movie.
Okay.
But when this book, I got this book by accident. Somebody I was dating was like a bookstore manager, and like this book called High Fidelity by this guy Nick. Spacing on his last name. He was a really well known like music culture author,
Mhm.
and this book was my life. I'm reading it, and all these stories. This guy's British and all that, but it was exactly what I was thinking and doing. So in the movie, John Cusack plays the record store manager, and Jack Black is one of the crazy employees, and that was actually a huge breakout role for him. If you never saw the movie, it's a fun
Okay.
throwback.
Great.
But just the stories, that book was like, talking about records and its significance, and all these things were like, it was that. It was all that. So then when I started reading liner notes, and it was like, well, okay, so there's an engineer and a producer, and again, that this is like the first time I'd ever heard these words. It wasn't in
Right.
there was no this was not in the zeitgeist yet by any stretch. This was,
Sure.
because I mean, these were still the days where a lot of people wouldn't even get credited on records they did.
Right.
But when you started to, compile, like stackpile records, and you started reading, and it's like, oh wait, that guy also did this record, and then he this like, oh, you started to kind of see what you see that there was like this whole thing going on past the
Mhm.
cover.
Mhm.
There was like, oh, okay, and you started to kind of, like I said, you'd start to notice like, wow, the records I love, this guy did like, four of them. Like,
Right.
what's that about? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Because what's his role? And I mean, it was so, like I said, we had so little information there that, um, I've rarely ever admitted this, but when the first Spinal Tap movie came out, they played it in the music hall that I used to see concerts in all the time. So I'm there sitting on the bleachers like I would for a regular concert, and there wasn't that many of us in there because they didn't show movies in there, but there for some reason they showed this in there. And I was watching it by myself, and I didn't really know Spinal Tap was a comedy because I'd never seen anything. I'd never seen. I mean, kind of,
Yeah.
but it's just like, wow, these guys are kind of really weird. Are they all like this? Like that's how like isolated I was with this stuff, right?
Wow. Wow.
The
Well, the
like I
drummer you must have started to
Yeah. Well, no, but it was clear it was a comedy, but it wasn't like what, probably the way most people perceived it. Because for me, I was just the kid in my records.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what, I didn't talk, there wasn't anybody to talk to about it. I mean, there were a few people, not many.
Sure.
So it was just kind of like, huh. And again, it was weird because of this where I was. It was like, well, this is where I see all these rock shows, and they're playing like this rock movie. So, it was just kind of like I didn't really, I left puzzled, I think. I was like, I think it's a good movie, but no, it wasn't until much later. It's like, oh gosh. So when I moved to New York City, you know, I was Uh, I had some challenges to overcome, you know what I
Sure.
mean? So
Sure.
it was pretty terrifying because
So
I
so
because I
going
know
going
I knew no one when I moved here, so it was like I
Wow.
literally just like got out of the train and was like, anyway. Sorry,
Wow.
your question?
Wow, then you have to find a place to lay your head and everything.
Oh yeah, no, it was terrifying.
Wow. So just going back, like in childhood, what was your home like growing up? Was it religious? Did you go to church and hear church music? Was it not religious? Was it
I've never been to church in my life. I've never read the Bible.
okay?
My There was no religion in my family or home ever.
Okay. Okay.
And I think my parents met at some church social, But that's all I'd heard of it.
Wow.
There was
Okay.
absolutely nothing. And
Wow.
I still haven't done any of that.
We got some good music in the church, yeah.
Do they? Okay, yeah, I wouldn't know actually.
Um, so then your parents, did they listen what did they listen to? Same stuff? Like with
Uh, Beatles,
mhm,
Bob Dylan. My
mhm,
dad was a huge Elvis fan.
okay,
Um, uh, yeah, it was, Beatles, Abbey Road, Magical Mystery Tour, Bob Dylan, Hard Rain, that Santana record with the big
mhm,
one with the lion on the
yeah,
cover.
yeah,
They had the Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass, the iconic cover with the woman with the whipped cream. That was
okay,
really cool. And that one obviously caught my attention. Um, uh, Gordon Lightfoot. They listened to some of that. Um, yeah, a lot of yeah, just some Carpenters. This band called Bread. They used to play that wear that
yep,
record out.
yep,
Um, I grew up in listening to AM radio in a '65 Oldsmobile, and sitting in the back seat.
yeah.
So yeah, it was all that kind of stuff.
8 tracks, you probably had 8 tracks, right?
Yep, I had everything.
Ka-clunk, ka-clunk.
Yep, I even had an 8-track recorder, so I could actually make my own 8-track tape.
Ooh,
Yeah. And
wow,
yeah, I know like to me the with these formats, it's just pure comedy that vinyl is back and
yes,
cassettes have come back. And it's like,
yeah.
if you even think about bringing 8 tracks back, you're no, no. Because it was the worst format ever. My God, it was just like so bad.
Well, they kicked around on the floor of the car safely,
Yeah.
they would still work after.
Boy, what a like yeah, luckily I hope those don't come back because those do not deserve to come back at all. At all.
Cassettes are making a comeback, huh?
Yeah,
I've missed that one.
there are indie bands that are having cassette only releases, and I have to laugh. Uh,
Wow and Flutter, here we go again. Alright.
I was one of the few people that you know were thrilled when compact disc came out, and I still have a couple thousand. I've or sold a few thousand over the years, but I still have a couple thousand, and I still listen to a CD every morning when I wake up.
So in college, I was the first person to bring a compact disc player to our
Wow,
college radio. I would haul it down
wow.
from my dorm room and
Yeah, no,
we
those,
love
I mean, that was amazing. But when it first started, there were so few titles out.
Yep.
So, so it was, it was almost like it was a little bit of like a secret society of like trying to find out like, you know, who's selling these CD things,
Yep.
you know?
Yep. I remember they gave me U2 Under a Blood Red Sky
Yep.
and John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, and I'm
Paco de
forgetting
Lucia.
Paco de Lucia.
Yeah,
I listened to that.
that was like one of the first 10 CDs ever made. I know
I
because
listened to that
I just
100,000
I
times.
used to just go by to the bin like 5 million because there were only like 30 out. It was crazy.
It was
Yeah.
good.
And
It's good.
the first two I bought were Kate Bush, The Hounds of Love, and Simon and Garfunkel's Greatest Hits.
Okay. Okay. And then high school, just before that, our band would record onto a cassette player
Hmm.
with 1 mic that I
Yeah.
but through experimentation, I hung it all over my bedroom and had the bass player, my drums, the guitar player.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We we actually made a mix physically,
Hey,
that worked.
that's how you figure it out.
It was pretty wild,
Yeah.
pretty wild.
Yeah.
Alright, so you get to New York, you get off the train. What was the plan? So what are you
Well, I had signed up for this tech school called the Institute of Audio Research in Greenwich
mhm,
Village. It was like I said, it was like a 9 month like tech school kind of thing. No diploma, you just get like some kind of certificate. So I found a place at the YMCA
mhm.
on 34th Street, Ninth Avenue. Um, and I'd never left home,
Wow.
so it's like, and my parents came down with me on the train, dropped me off. And I remember when they left me in my room at the Y and closed the door, the sound in my head was like a vault, like, and I'm just like,
Oh boy.
okay, okay. Like I know nothing. I knew no one, so I didn't know. I knew that like I lived here and the school was there, and if I walk down this road and then go like that, I'll get to the school. That's all I knew. So I did that, and then slowly I widened my path. Like every day I'd try a different. "Well, what's this avenue look like? What's this avenue?
Sure.
But yeah, just had no idea at all.
Wow. Wow.
Um, I used to live in Converse Chuck Taylors around that era, and back home, a pair of Chuck Taylors would last me about 3 years. Here in New York, where you're walking constantly, I didn't notice the look at first. I just noticed the smell. And I'm like, and I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, what is that smell? It's like, oh my god, it's coming from the shoe, and they're falling apart. And they would last like maybe 6 months here before they just like basically disintegrate off my feet.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Wow.
I can tell you, just to save you the research, if your feet get wet in a pair of Chuck Taylors, putting them in the microwave only makes them warm and wet. It doesn't dry them out. Just a little tech tip to those that are into that kind of thing. I'm here to help.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you go through the 9-month thing, and then if I remember correctly, someone picked you up right out of school, like,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Well, so this school was started in 1969, and actually one of the people in the first class was Jack Douglas, who was the producer of all those Aerosmith records that I knew and loved.
Wow.
And the first class was done in a hotel room near the Madison Square Garden in 1969. And so I go to this thing. It's right near. It's just up from Washington Square Park, and like, yeah, I don't know what I'm walking into. I'd done live sound back home. I'd been a DJ with a friend of mine, so I knew what records were my life. So I I didn't know anything about the city or anything. So just kind of like just trying to figure everything out, and freaking out, and it was just really hard,
Mhm.
because there was no, because I didn't know anyone here.
Mhm.
I didn't know anyone here. So it was like, it's just me and just me, you know.
Mhm.
And at the
Wow.
Y, you didn't have a phone. You had to go use the payphone in the hallway.
Okay.
So I'd like, call my folks or whatever.
Yep.
Uh, you know, however I do that, but it was, or sometimes they'd try and call me and someone would come, the poor, whoever's room was near the phone
Yeah.
just be tortured because they just have to be, basically the traveling phone operator. Like, hey, you gotta call, so, so yeah, did that. But, so the program was, 9 months, and I started in September, and I got I guess an internship at a studio in Soho called Green Street Recording. Um, and it was, when was that? Spring, like March, April, something like that. And, and I show up and they, you know, let me be there to, clean out the toilets and empty the garbage and slowly sit in on sessions and do errands and that kind of thing. And I was there for just under a year. And the only reason why I left was because they had started building a second control room, and basically all their cash was tied up in this construction. And they were like, well, we can't pay you this week. And
Oh.
already uh I had already had some offers from other studios,
Mhm.
and including the Hit Factory. Or whereas I turned them down before, I basically called them up going, "Hey, is that thing
Mm.
still available?" So I was gone and I went uptown and into, Broadway and 54th Street, right across
Mhm.
from where Studio 54 was.
Mhm.
So,
Wow.
and then I was there and, but when I was at Green Street, it was, the beginning of Def Jam Records. So it was Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin hanging out, and it was, Public Enemy. It was Run DMC. I used to work with Jam Master Jay all the time. Uh, yeah, it was like Curtis Blow was my first album credit ever. Um, yeah, it was just a lot of hip hop. And again,
Mhm.
I knew not, I had heard, I remembered Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, listening to that record when I
Mhm.
was a kid, but that was really all it was like, it was so new that like it hadn't, it was right about, well, it blew up with the Run DMC Tougher Than Leather record, which so that was like 86, 85, 86.
Mhm.
That's when it really, my that single My Adidas, all that's when it was like really like, okay, it's out of New York now. It's
Sure.
it's now everybody's hearing this everywhere.
Sure.
Um so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, what was it like as you went from intern to person with a sense that, some of these people I'm working with are pretty well known or, like, what was that transition like?
um it was weird. I mean, one of the ones I fondly remember is these two guys from Jersey come in, and they're wearing like matching tracksuits, and they smell really, really bad. And they got this single, and they have there's a James Brown sample in it, but they didn't want to pay. They didn't want to pay to license it, so they hired this woman to come in to like basically re-sing the part. And they play the track, and she sings, "It takes two to make things go right." It was Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock, and it was the first single I ever, had been, in those sessions, and it was like the first. I'll never forget walking down East 34th Street one that summer and hearing it blast out of a car, and I was like, "Hey, that was those guys, those smelly guys, from Jersey, like Rob and Rock yeah." And that was, and it was like, "Oh, okay, all right, okay." So, and what's crazy. I mean, that that song. I mean, it's like it's almost like a day doesn't go by where I don't hear that song.
Really?
Whether it's used in whatever,
Uh-huh.
and it was like, it was funny. There was an old movie with Ryan Reynolds and Sandra Bullock called The Proposal,
Okay.
and there's a scene where you know, they're not together, but she's sleeping in the bed, he's sleeping on the floor, and they're like trying to get to know each other, and he mentions that song to her, and he kind of acts like he doesn't know the song because he wants to hear her sing the hook, and she kind of does, and then he starts to sing it, so it's like, and that was 20 years later after the song came out, and that movie now was almost 20 years ago, so it's like, god, it's like it's still out there like all the time.
Uh-huh.
I hear it all out of probably almost everything I've done. That's one of the top three songs I hear the most, just over and over and over again.
So I'm curious, in the other interview, you mentioned, there's an experience you have when you know something's good, you know when it's right. I'm gonna let you say it, but just you described this
In the
physical experience you have when,
Oh, yeah,
like
goosebumps.
yeah,
Yeah, goosebumps. Yeah, no, it's a thing, and it's I mean, that's the measurement.
yeah. I'm curious, when was the first time you experienced that as a in your
Uh,
career?
well, no, I mean, I discovered that in 1974 with a K-Tel record,
Okay,
and so it was
okay.
like, that's when that measurement started,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
and it just went on, and the one thing that's it's like how some people would have like a nervous tick. I have a rhythmic tick
Mm,
in that if I'm in the room, um, and I'm feeling it, I'm, you know, I'm, you know,
yep.
I'm not sitting still. And, and it was funny because I worked with Meatloaf a bunch, and he admitted to me later how, um, he liked having me around because of that, because he used it as a measurement himself.
Nice.
Because if it was like, it's like if this guy's getting it, because I'd be,
Yep.
there'd be a whole room of people, and I'd be the one sitting there, that it's like if it's like I can't, I have like no control over it, and he
The
got
first fan.
he kind of started to rely on it a bit,
Wow.
you know.
You're the first fan.
Yeah, right. Well, I remember when I was at Green Street, there was this guy, there was so many people that, were names then, but have sort of been lost to obscurity. And there was this guy named Colonel Abrams. And, he had a couple singles in the, I guess, late 70s, early 80s. And he had this whole, he was scientific about it. He was like, he had done the research and found the frequency that the bone in your leg, whatever, I can't remember the frequency what it was, but it would make your basically your leg bone move, which to him was it would make you dance. So he would make sure that every record he had, that frequency was in the record, that specific frequency, because that to him was the recipe. In that, like, even if you don't love the song, you know your leg's gonna start going. Next thing you know, you're out on the floor. And it was just like, okay, all right. And again, this is before computers or anything. I mean, everything you had
Right.
to find out was, at the library or an encyclopedia or something.
Right, right.
So you just kind of like, all right, I mean, I'm not gonna do that research, but so I'm guessing you did, because who would make up such a story such as that?
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have a sense when you're mixing or producing, you have a sense like, "Think we got a hit here?" Or is it just kinda like, "I really like this." Is it strictly personal, or do you think it's more objectified at this point in your career?
It's a mixture of both. It depends on how invested I am in it. I
Mhm.
mean, there are records that I am invested in, and there are records I'm not.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, I mean, but that's not to say that the records that I'm not, it's like it's not, I'm not saying that, like, so I'm paying less attention to that. It's
Of
just that
course.
my my role is what it is, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna do the role.
Right. Right.
But if it's something more, then it's something more. But yeah, but the thing about the hit thing is that label was like, oh, this is gonna be the first single, and the guy is like, oh my god, I freaking hate that song, and but it ends up being a single,
Right. Right.
and it's just like, and it's like, okay, well, and if that's your ticket that gives you that career,
Sure.
here it is, and
Sure.
there was something on Instagram like a month ago. This woman was telling a story of this somebody who had a couple of hits like in the 80s or early 90s, and was going on the road, but was adamant that I am not playing the hits.
Mhm.
And everyone around this person was like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, like,
Mhm.
how is that? Like, and they didn't want to play the hits. And of course they didn't sell tickets, and the tour got completely canceled. Because it's just like, but there was somebody, I can't remember, something else I was reading that had a really fascinating take on live shows, which was that really struck me, which was for them, just to go out and play the hits is like, it just doesn't interest them anymore. Like they don't enjoy the experience.
Mhm.
And if you think about something like the Taylor Swift tour, what did it that lasted like 2 years, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, I mean, every second of that thing is choreographed. Even like probably the banter is choreographed. So it's like, so yeah, how do so it's like, so it's really just like this whole deja vu thing,
Mhm.
and especially with some of those players that were in the band for 2 years. I mean, I'm sure, they're more than happy to go deja vu with that paycheck for 2 years. But at the
Mhm.
same time, but like I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody not like a pop star, but they were kind of expressing of like not wanting to just go and retread the same show like every night. And I was like, I absolutely appreciate that. I could,
Mhm.
because I have a similar thing how I work in the studio. It's like in that like I'm lucky that I get to do a lot of different types of music,
Mhm.
and I don't want to just do the same thing over and over again because it's
Sure.
just so easy. Just it gets to be like just muscle memory.
Mhm.
Where you're sitting here and you're editing. As far as the client thinks, you're really into this edit, but you're really thinking about laundry and ordering
Mhm.
Chinese later.
Mhm.
But to them, it's just but it's just like whatever. I'm just
Yeah.
doing.
'Cause you just know it rotely. Yeah. Right.
I'm just doing the role.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting, because on the audience side, right, people now listen to this album, they've collected up memories, they're gonna go, experience it live. I mean, it's an interesting interplay between the artist and the audience in a live performance always, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
but, bringing that side of it, you're also human beings and, you did something yesterday and, like, probably none of us lives the exact same day twice in a row, but
yeah, yeah,
I mean, there's always some variation or something we throw in or, we never
yeah,
make meals the same way, right? Just put a little more salt, a little less salt, we'll try a different spice.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So, yeah. Alright, so let's go back. So you're in New York, you're interning, you get brought up in the ranks to a
Mhm.
different studio, you're there, you're producing some hits, you're hearing them out on the street, right?
Yeah.
You're getting at this point, you're pretty much established, right? I mean, you're
I mean, I didn't, so I technically started in '86, and I didn't have my first production credit until '96.
okay.
And so because back then it was like, you know, being an engineer was being an engineer. I mean,
Mhm,
all these guys that like, kind of mentored me were like these legendary engineers. And they, and some of them grew into the production side.
mhm,
Some of them didn't. And
mhm,
there were some that started to grow into the production side and realized they did not like that. And they just kind of retreated back to just being the engineer.
mhm,
And, I understand every side of that completely just because each thing is so different,
mhm,
and, but even like, like I came up in what's kind of referred as the apprentice system in that, like, so I didn't learn anything at this tech school at all, as far as sessions go, at like literally at nothing.
mhm,
And, so the way you learn is by learning from whoever you're assisting. And if they are um, a nice human, they will teach you things. And if they are not a nice human, they won't.
mhm,
And that has influenced how I do things because the first guy I ever assisted, when he put a compressor on a bass, and I asked him why, he just gave me like this Cheshire cat kind of smile and didn't answer me. And
mm,
I was like, on it right then, it was like mental note. I will never be that guy ever.
mm, mm,
And I think people that like hide their secrets are just being silly because the truth with all this stuff is I could give anyone all of my settings, all of them, and it will not sound at all like what I would do
mhm,
because it's how you think about the record. And there are literally a million decisions in every mix. No
sure,
one, no one is going to be able to replicate that at all. So it's like, you can have yeah, here's my setting. Yeah, go crazy. Because it's just so, it's all not, because it's down to who you are as a listener and as an engineer,
Mhm.
and just in how you connect with the music. That's
Mhm.
what's influencing what you do.
Mhm.
So it's so when it's there, there's so I was lucky to learn like how to make records and how not to make records from some pretty legendary people.
Mhm.
And what's so interesting, and everyone's had this very same experience, is that you're assisting, you're watching this guy, it's amazing, but then you get your shot and you get to the console and you're just turning every knob and you're just blah 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 blah. Blah. And what you don't realize is that when you're doing all that, the one thing you're not doing is listening.
Mm.
So every knob you turn and every fader you adjust, if you paid attention, you'd realize that you're actually not making it sound better, making
Mm.
it sound smaller. And
Mm.
I learned that from like working with like the jazz guys who,
Mhm.
when you work with somebody like Al Schmidt, who did, was like iconic as far
Mhm.
as this approach, where it's like he just positions a mic, gets a level, and we're recording. There's no EQ.
Mhm.
He might have a compressor on a channel, but
Mhm.
set for what we call kissing the needle. Like it's like half dB. It's actually more for the color, the tone,
Mhm.
than the compression. And I do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And the best compliments I ever get when I finish a record, especially if I've like mixed and mastered it, is where it's as loud as it needs to be and bright and punchy, and people are like, it doesn't sound compressed, and I'm like, thank you.
Yeah.
That's what 40 years gets you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Bill Frisell.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
worked on the Have a Little Faith records.
You did, really?
Yeah. And what's fun, he does a cover of "Live to Tell," the Madonna song.
Mhm.
Um, the the last note happened, and then the tape ran out.
Oh, boy.
Like, literally spun off the reel. Like it's going, and we're, like, looking at it, it's like, and we're trying to signal him, and he's just like, and it's just like, "No, no, no," 'cause I can't, I don't remember, it's been so long, but I mean, it's a very long rendition of the song, and, like, here it is, like, I don't know, maybe we had 10 minutes left, I'll be more than fine. It was like, "Oh my god, it's gonna run out, it's gonna run out." And it was like the last note, sustain, 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 then ends, and then the tape runs off the machine.
Wow.
Yep, yep. The harrowing days of analog. God, oh man, yeah. No, he's. I've worked with him. I worked with him 3 times. That was the first time was on the John Zorn Naked City album.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know
Mhm.
that album at all.
I know of
Um,
it. Haven't heard.
it's if you like Bill, check it out because
Okay.
you won't believe that's Bill.
Okay.
John Zorn, Naked City.
I think that was back in the era of his earlier and I have that. Yeah, I have some music from
Y-
back then I used.
Yeah, but it was, and then I did this Kenny Wheeler record for ECM, uh which has turned out to be this like legendary record. I see it mentioned on these like forums all the time. It
Uh-huh.
was I had In a Circle at Power Station Studio C. It was Kenny Wheeler on flugelhorn, Lee Konitz on saxophone, Dave Holland on bass, um, Bill Frisell on guitar, and wait, am I missing somebody? I don't think so. But they were all just standing in a circle, and that was the record.
Wow.
Yeah, it was,
Quite a
and
circle.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was just, it's like one of those records.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Yeah. I admire how his use of space,
oh,
just
space is everything.
yeah.
That's like, I don't care how advanced you are to get into this, but that is usually the last thing you learn.
Mm.
You learn everything before that, right? And it's just
Mhm.
like, oh, you're doing it, all right, proficient, blah blah blah. And it's like, but it's just,
Yeah.
The space is the space is where it's at.
He has a song called "Girl Asks Boy," and it's
Hmm.
just a simple little I shouldn't say simple.
Hmm.
It's just only guitar, a little bit of bass,
Yep.
kind of fades in and builds up, and then just so elegant. It's
There,
just a beautiful piece.
there was one song that didn't make it to that Bill Frisell record, which was him. He had he had it was about we had like 5 or 6 music boxes out, and he had like composed something with these, and we recorded it, and it did not make the album. I wonder if it'll
Really?
ever see the light of day. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, like, he made the little wheel
Yeah.
play.
Yeah. He just kind of like kind of think of like a player piano vibe, right? But
Sure.
think of it as like so he kind of like just kind of composed an
Mhm.
arrangement
Mhm.
that worked with all these music boxes.
Yeah. I can totally see that because
Yeah, I
the
can still picture
sampling,
him doing it.
the sampling that he's done in some of the albums, right? Where it's
Yeah,
just a repeating sample and he's playing against it and another
yeah,
one. Yeah. A brilliant guy. It's been fun listening to him over the years and, like, the memories that
sure.
sort of collect around.
Yeah,
"Oh, it's here when I was listening," and "I was there when I was listening to that," and that sort of things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
A
No,
lot of
I've
fun.
been really fortunate to work with a lot of those guys,
Mhm.
and it's a whole different planet.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I did a Jim Hall record,
Ah.
and boy, this was a good moment. It was like so Jim's in the studio, and his wife is in the control room with me, and she asks me what kind of music I like to work with. And I thought about it for a second. I pointed to Jim and I said, this kind of music, because it's, I don't, I'm just here to like document it. I don't have to fix anything,
Sure.
and I don't have to do any punches, what I mean?
Right.
Cause we're capturing his performance or, yeah, I said it in a cooler way than that. And she was like, good answer.
Yeah, I saw him years back at Carnegie Hall, and it was
Yeah.
just this
Yeah.
magical night, it's just
Just, it,
his guitar. I think he has 1 or 2 little boxes and a and an amp and a room full of spellbound people,
it's just you get the mastery
Mhm.
is that comes across, right? Is just
Mhm.
like it's kind of breathtaking,
Mhm.
it's and yeah, like I said, to be around that is just like, oh, this is some rarefied air here, man. It's like, savor it, same thing. He did like a Dave Brubeck solo record. He hadn't done a solo piano record in 40 years.
Wow.
And it was just us and Dave recording. It was like,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. A lot of stuff like that.
That can be distracting, just all the stuff that'd be going through your head at that moment.
Oh man, and then then fast forward to another one where it's like this guy, this producer had written a song for his first child that was about to be born. Um, uh, it was a little girl, and he wrote a song, and it was called Untitled at the time. And in walks Billy Porter and like a guy playing to play Rhodes. And I just kind of set the levels and we hit record and the take's done and the keyboard player says, and that's the take. And that was the take. One shot, no punches, nothing. And
Mhm.
I mean I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Just
Mhm.
like it's like and that's how you do people. I mean, and that was like, God, when was that? That was wow, that must have been 25 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, like yeah. And it was, Billy's still ridiculous. It's just
That's
amazing.
beautiful. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So, what other jazz folks have you worked with?
Quite a few. Well, there was a label out of Cincinnati called Telarc that started as a classical label in the 70s. I think they actually released the first commercially available digital classical album in 1978, I think. And there were two engineers there, Jack Renner and Michael Bishop, and I learned a ton from them. So it started out as a classical label. Then they kind of had like a jazz, a jazz arm of the label, and I did a lot of the jazz sections here. Um, One really cool record was a woman named Jeannie Bryson, who was Dizzy Gillespie's daughter. Christian McBride was the bass player.
Mhm.
So it was a lot of stuff for Telek. With Jeannie Bryson. It was Hank Crawford and Jimmy McGriff, the organ player.
Wow.
Did two records with Ray Brown. Joe Lovano did a record with he did his take on what was the Charlie Parker with strings. We did like a new interpretation of that with Gunther Schuller conducting, who I think had done the Charlie Parker one.
Wow.
And that was like full orchestra. I've done a lot of big orchestra stuff, like
Really?
30, 40 pieces. And I think the biggest string date I've done is like 80. That was for a film with Michelle Camilo conducting from the piano.
Really?
Mhm.
So, I'm a big Michelle Camilo fan.
Yeah,
He's
he's such
something
a
else.
lovely guy. So
Yeah.
yeah, but just yeah, all those guys are so cool. Um, because the thing, because those records don't make money.
Mm.
So they're just this is just what they do.
Mhm.
And not, there's no limo, there's no, so it's this is just what they've done, and many of these guys have been, um, players their entire lives. I remember
Sure.
I used to do a lot of stuff for Japanese labels, and there was something was one of these endless Japanese clients, and Robin Ford, the guitar player, was hired
Mhm.
to play, and it
Mhm.
was like the week of Christmas or something, and I knew of him. I think he started playing with Miles when he was like 14 or something, Robert Ford. So knew of the reputation. He just comes in with his guitar, and we had like rented an amp and like a wah wah pedal. And it was like, my God. Like, wow. 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 You know,
Yeah.
what am I gonna say? It's just like Jesus, you
Sure.
know. Or like
Sure.
doing uh David Sanchez's first album. What's his name? Danilo. I think he's like a Panamanian piano player. I can't remember his last name. Can picture the session. Just a lot of stuff like Telarc in the '90s. I did tons of records with them. Many, many, many.
Mhm.
And yeah, but it's a lot of yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. And then what's his name? His dad was a tenor player. I can picture it. Bald guy. It was his first record, and we did a version of the Eric Clapton song "Tears in Heaven," and we had Pat Metheny playing guitar on it.
Oh,
Yeah, that was gorgeous. It's Josh. Josh. I can picture his face. Can't picture the record. This was all a while ago. You can imagine. But
sure.
yeah, but just a lot of really, really cool experiences with that.
A while back, a friend of mine said, "Hey, just be ready this night. I'm gonna pick you up." I'm like, "Okay, fine." He picks me up.
Mhm.
We just start driving. We end up at Red Bank,
Oh,
and
okay.
we're in Red Bank. We go into this place. It's Pat Metheny. Pat
Oh,
Metheny alone,
wow.
and he's doing this really interesting thing. I didn't even know was going on, but basically, place is packed, and he's playing different songs. He played like a medley of pieces of his different, just this huge medley of his material.
Mhm.
And then he stops and he talked and spoke and spoke and spoke and was like, I don't usually speak, but this is about interacting and sharing and, and reminiscing and then
Wow.
it was an amazing evening because, I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh
really, it's just
God.
kinda like, "Thank you very much, Steve Rodby,"
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and they go and hit the next song, so this was a very different experience, and it was lovely. It was a lovely evening.
I would
I hope
imagine.
they recorded it somewhere. I think he went around and did it in a few different places.
I would imagine when he was speaking, you probably hear a pin drop in that place
Absolutely.
because it was just like, because everyone was like, I had the same exact like thought, like, what is happening right now? Wow. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
those are the moments. You know.
Yeah. A lot, and I often wonder, like the Pat Metheny group, some of those mammoth epic
Oh
songs they
man.
created.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to chat with him and just get the story about, how do you put together Pick,
Yeah.
Third Wind, Finding and Believing, any of those
Yeah.
large songs, like, someone surely conceives of one piece and then another piece and they put them together, whatever, but I think it'd be
Yeah.
an interesting story to hear.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Have you done anything you'd call an epic song? Any of these long, like, 10-minute long, bands all cranking and has all these different pieces to it, or
Yeah, well, the one actually, the one of the bigger ones was that Aerosmith's ain't I don't want to miss a thing.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
song, that was,
Yeah,
that was like one of their biggest songs that they did not write. Um, uh, but as far as like instrumentally and stuff goes, there's one that was kind of crazy is actually that's the gold record up there is Harry Connick Jr.'s record Star Turtle, which
okay.
was his experimental record.
Really?
It's on
Okay,
Columbia. It was came out in '96, and this was Columbia's way of saying, "Thank you for making us a ton of money. Here's a budget. Do whatever the hell you want."
okay.
So it's a record called Star Turtle, and uh, he had just gotten married to his wife Jill, and I mean, I think now his daughters are like in their 20s or 30s, and he was like this, you know, prodigy piano player,
Mhm.
and but he was still like this like goofy kid, so it was like, you know, so I was used to seeing pictures of him with the suits, all that kind of stuff. And he just
Sure.
like shows up like looking like a guy like just just got out of the mall, with his
Uh,
baseball cap on and stuff. It's just like, what is happening? And so this record was based on a dream he had about this turtle that comes down to space, comes down from space to basically gauge if the Earth should be saved or not. And
Interesting
so,
premise.
and I don't know if Harry had a drug period. There was no evidence of that, but I mean, it was just this was kind of like, okay, we're doing this.
Imagination. Okay.
Yeah. So the record is, I'd be curious to see what it is like in sales compared to his other ones because it's just so weird.
Uh-huh.
And that anyone that was a Harry fan would have heard this and been like, okay, I don't know what's happening here, you know, because it literally starts out with like a like guitar heavy thing that's right out of like Queen, like literally 48 tracks of vocals, and he was doing these kind of like vocal cluster things.
Interesting.
It's just, and then so basically it's like a concept album in that every song is a different style, and it's like him trying to convince the turtle of all the things that are good on earth so that they shouldn't come in and destroy the world. And so it starts out with a Queen thing, and then it goes into like and then it's like every style of music. Then there's like a whole funk jam. But the kicker about this record is he played everything on it.
Wow.
He played piano, he played the guitar, he did all the vocals. And then there's like a New Orleans style strut track that he wants to set up like it's in a club. So we set up in the studio, we set up all these little tables with like glasses, and we like mic the room and he basically we basically record a crowd that's all him. So we hit record. He sits at one table. He's having one half of a conversation. We hit stop. We rewind. He goes to the other side of the table. He's now doing the other side of the conversation, and repeats this throughout the room. And there's tinkling glasses,
Uh-huh.
and we record him on the phone booth where he's like the bartender, and he's like, "No, no, he's not here." And click, blah 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 blah, and the whole thing. And then he plays like this whole funk jam where it's like slap bass and all this kind of stuff. Um, and then there's the horn section, and he plays
Wow.
every horn.
Wow.
And we didn't have them there, so there's a place here. It used to be here on this guy named Rod Baltimore on 48th Street was like the horn repair guy. So we like rented a bunch. We rented like every horn from him, and then Harry played like did a whole horn arrangement and played every part. And
Wow.
we just did this for every. There was like a whole different scenario for every song, and yeah, it was crazy, and yeah, it was just and so he had just gotten back. So his wife grew up in New Mexico, and so his mother-in-law was a sculptor, and they just come back from a vacation, and so she had taught him sculpting. So so here Harry is playing all the instruments, but his band members are hanging out anyway, but they're just kind of hanging out. And so while we're working on this thing, Harry's assistant goes and gets like a whole pile of modeling clay. So while all the production's going on, Harry is building life-size busts of all the band members because he just learned how to do this from his mother-in-law. And it's like these things were like dead on.
Wow.
It's just like this guy is like
Different level, huh?
you could pretty much just throw him into anything, and he's just that kind of guy.
That's
Just
amazing.
give him a second to kind of get his bearings. Like, okay, hold on. I
Sure.
mean, it was like these life-size busts, and it was just
What a brilliant human being. What a
yeah.
pleasure it must be to spend time working with people like that.
Oh yeah. No, it's yeah. It was beyond. You're just like wow, but it's like the nicest guy. And I think it was even like that was in the that was another one that was around Christmas time. I think I'd only been working with him for like a week, and gave me a tip from like 300 bucks. And as like a beginning engineer back 30 years ago, that's like giving you like a grand and going, hey man, thanks so much. It's like for you will forever be in the upper tier for sure.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Lovely
What a
guy.
great story. Thanks for sharing that one.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you so, you know, it's kind of interesting. I was thinking of analogies. I was like, you may hate this, you may like it. I don't know, but it's kind of like people come to you with these ideas, right? And they come to you, and the ideas are going to come out, and of course they've rehearsed and practiced to some greater or lesser degree.
Mhm.
But to me, it almost seems like a pregnant woman, right? Like you're almost like a delivery doctor. Like there's this thing they have inside them that's gonna come out, and
Mhm.
you're gonna catch it, and you're
Yeah,
gonna.
yeah, yeah.
Is that fair? Is it fair to say it that way? And and I guess
Uh,
I
well,
mean, it's not perfect analogy, but
yeah. Well, um, it actually starts earlier than that.
mhm.
Not that I'm the father. I'm not saying
Right,
that.
right. I
I'm not
got
saying
you.
that, but um, it's almost like I'm in their head first.
Mm,
And I'm in their head first. That sounded weird. Um, but uh, because the conversations a lot of times happen before it's ready to be delivered.
okay. Tell
You
me
know,
about that.
yeah. So I mean, so whereas the actual birth is when the record's done, but like, okay,
Oh,
well,
okay.
what's the kid gonna look like? All right, let's work on the arrangement.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so is he gonna have red hair? Is he gonna have blue eyes? Is he, like, is he gonna be tall? Is he gonna be short? Is he gonna be
Sure.
a weirdo? Is he gonna be cool or is he gonna be a dork? I mean, and then, all right, well, what's his name? You know, well, what do you got? What do you want? And it goes back to that. I mean, it's really
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
really about building like that. And,
yeah.
but the fun part for me is that so often I've been in the process since then. And my goal is always to beat the picture that they have in their mind of what it's going to be.
Mm,
And I've done that. I've been able to do that many, many times, where it's like, because they're like, okay, they're writing the song. Okay, I think it's gonna look like this. And then when we're in it and then it's like starts to take shape and then things start to maybe change in ways they didn't, you know, foresee, it's like, well, that's what this whole process is. It's like you can like analyze it down to the rivet, if it's construction, you know, let's see what we can do to somehow take what you have, but just make it that much more beautiful. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, it's fine that the rivets are there, but let's make it so we don't see them.
mhm,
I don't want to see how it was constructed. I just want to see the shape at the end.
mm, mhm,
So let's do that. So let's,
mhm,
and but there are artists where they're like, oh no, I have to see the rivets. I have to see the construction. I have to see, because in some ways, to some artists, that is like the struggle for them, and
mhm.
they want that to be a part of that record. They want people to hear that struggle.
Gotcha,
It,
gotcha.
it gets that deep.
Sure, sure. Well, I like how you fixed my metaphor there. And it is like a co-creation kinda thing, right? Because you're bringing an art and a science, right, that you know
Absolutely.
inside out and backwards, and
Hmm.
they're bringing their ideas and their thoughts, right? And yeah, it's really neat. It's gotta be quite an honor and a privilege to A, to be trusted that way, working,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
right?
Completely. Yeah.
Because it's not just their idea, but it's their career to some degree, it's their right? And,
It's everything. I mean,
and
because the thing about this thing, I mean, the thing that people sometimes don't realize is that people come to me to be vulnerable.
mm,
That's they don't know that yet, but
mhm,
that's where it's got to get to in order to like pop out this baby.
sure.
You have to have a degree of letting go,
Mhm,
and if you don't, everything suffers. And I
mhm,
have terabytes of that on hard drives of those records where they they just couldn't let it go.
mm,
And I'll get people reaching out to me, you know, decades later going, I wish I just let you do that thing you said you think would work,
mm. Wow.
you know,
Mhm,
because the thing the way it's such a like intense process. And I don't mean intense in like we're not talking sweat and like like
mhm,
angst and anxious. No, it's just that like it's like the truest kind of collaboration. I mean, it's like
mhm.
having a kid with somebody basically. I mean, I always joke I have about like 10,000 kids in this way because I was there. I was there for all of
Mhm,
it. And
mhm,
and the the best records happen when they let the process happen. Where they let go to something, especially if it's something that I know they're just holding on to out of stubbornness, but it's actually
mhm,
not, just because, and it's just like that's a foolish idea and
mhm,
something that you will regret for quite some time.
mm.
So because everyone I work with, I end up being their therapist every single time,
Really?
because as I like to say, it's like I don't know a singer alive that, you know, wakes up and says, "Wow, I feel amazing today. Where's my guitar?" When you sing a happy song, they're like, "Oh my God, why did he break up with me? Where's my guitar?" You know,
Right.
there aren't a lot of ecstatic songs written,
Mhm.
you know. But to me, they're not the best ones anyway. The ones where it's like, you know, those the breakup records are classically the best records, really,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
because you got to get it out, and
Mhm.
this is how you're getting it out. And you know, so all that said, you can imagine when someone comes to me and they just want the hit and make the money. We're never gonna see eye to eye.
Mhm.
Because I just I don't care. I just don't, you
Mhm.
know. And again, it's like it's a foolish mission because it's like because it's not up to us if it's gonna be a hit,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
So you just have to kind of Um, you know, here's a great example. Years and years ago, this woman, she was a model, and she just she could sing, but her songs weren't great. But she was obsessed about a gear. Like she just fixate on like someone did her a very bad injustice and told her of the importance of equipment
Mhm.
because in a weird way instead of concentrating on being a better songwriter, she like concentrating more on knowing tech speak because she thought it would make her record better. Um, and and I'll never forget this. Where we're working, and this is before Pro Tools and all that stuff. This is still the tape days, and I'll never forget this. You know, again, like gorgeous woman model. You know, I have to see if she how long she modeled for, but I'll never forget this. Where it was like she was like, "Oh, you know, I'm coming to the studio." I'm like, "You know what? I'll just meet you downstairs." And and in this bag, I had all of her tapes, and and I got in her car and just sitting there and like, "I'm not the guy for you." And I handed her tapes, going, and I could just tell that like she probably had had no man ever say that to her.
Mhm. Mhm.
Variety of reasons.
Right,
But
right.
the look of shock on her face, she had no idea how to process that. And I was
Mhm.
like, best of luck to you, but yeah, I'm not the guy. And then I just
Mhm.
got out of the car and went back upstairs because it was like, you know, you're looking at this completely wrong, you know, and it's, and I never ever come at this as like I'm the authority. It's like I'm just telling you how it really works. It's like I don't, you know, you can do whatever you want. Um, you know, I'm gonna give you some, you know, if you're interested, I can tell you some ideas how to get to to your desired result better. If you don't want those ideas, that's fine. But it's like it's your record, you're the boss. I'm gonna do everything in my power to get this thing as great as it can be for you. That's what I'm here for.
Mhm.
And that's what we're here for. So it's like if you're cool with that, then we're good. If you need other things, you know, it's like maybe I'm not the best fit for you.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Well, there's a role, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating what you've learned about people.
Oh man. I am writing a book, so
Are you really?
it's yeah, because it's because I yeah. It's actually a lot of this stuff is unbelievable.
Ah.
You know, I mean, the one thing that, you know, is, very interesting is, uh, I, how do I put it? I've had to turn down, uh, physical advances more than a few times.
Mhm.
Because the thing about being a producer is that, um, to uh, someone who is lonely, they sometimes construe what I'm doing as a producer as something else. it's like, because it's like I'm paying attention to you, I'm listening to you, I'm complimenting you, I'm
Mhm,
collaborating with you. We're doing a lot of
mhm,
things together.
mhm.
Maybe we've had a meal or two because, we need to eat
Sure.
something so we don't fall over. And some people have like taken that a little too far and have had to
Mhm,
like put the kibosh on a few of those where
mhm,
it's like, I'm not here for that.
mhm.
Thank you, but not,
Right,
and
right.
those haven't ended very well.
Mhm,
But it's something, again, it's like the producer is like the ultimate boyfriend.
mhm, mhm.
And so you have to be really, really careful, and then and like I work with a lot of these plug-in companies, like beta testing and stuff like that. And they always ask me, what do you need? It's like, I need like a psychological examination plug-in. I need a way, I need a way of determining, is this person nuts? Should I go ahead with this project? That's what I need more than anything.
Uh-huh,
I don't need
uh-huh.
another compressor. I don't need another EQ. I need like mental analysis because I have to do so much of it on my own, and I've gotten really good at it. But wow, 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 because it's a thing, and I mean, I turned down probably 70% of the people that come to me
Really.
because it's just they're just not ready or they're not good.
Mhm.
They have no business being near a microphone. I just can't sit through it.
Sure.
Because if I'm gonna work with you, I'm all in on it, so I'm gonna listen to this record more than anyone on earth ever will, even you, the artist, because
Mhm,
I'm the one that's gonna be going over every note that we've recorded
mhm.
and just make sure that it's there for the right reasons and doing the right thing. So,
Sure.
so if you're nuts, you know, I'm gonna get nuts with you, and I do not wanna be a part of that at all. I've been through that, and that's a rough road,
Mhm,
and there's just not enough money for it.
mhm.
There really isn't.
Mm.
So, so that's a whole thing.
Yeah, Robert, it seems like you really operate with integrity, right? You have
I try to, yeah.
standards you've
Oh, yeah.
developed over time for professional standards in terms of the engineering and the artistry and the producing. You have moral standards in that, "I'm sorry, ma'am."
Yep. Yep.
We're
Right.
collaborating together, but,
Yeah. Yeah,
we're
that's
making
it.
something not,
Yep.
right? And I just sort of wonder, like work and worldview, right? The title of the podcast.
Mhm.
Just like what governs your these moral areas? How do you mentioned haven't been to church, et
Mhm.
cetera. So like where did you develop sort of a moral sense about, uh, things like that, for example?
I mean, I talk about this a lot in therapy, which is like, I feel like my life is more about reactions than anything else, in that everything I do is reacting to something someone else has done.
Okay, yeah.
Like I was bullied as a kid. So it's
Mhm,
like I developed, certain shields and armament to
mhm,
fight that off. And and so I know what it's like to uh be, in the darkness by yourself. And I do everything I can to help people not be in that because I know how dark it is. You know what I
mhm,
mean?
mhm,
Um, and I learned, and part of that reaction thing is it's like when people ask, "Oh, who inspired you?" It's like that's actually the wrong question for me because it's like, who inspired me to not be them? It's like, I don't, like when I first moved to New York, a huge incentive was like, okay, I don't want to be you. I don't want to be you. I definitely don't want to be you, and I'm absolutely not going to be you. So
mhm,
what would help me get away from that? I know, leave town. Let me leave because that will ensure that I'll never be any of you. And so it's built from that, just all those kinds of things. And I saw so many sessions that, uh, and so many like artists that just did it all wrong, and some that did it all right. Like two examples would be this software called Pro Tools had just come out, and this guy was obsessed with it. Um, for those with OCD, you get in, Pro Tool editing could be your nirvana beyond, because you can manipulate every molecule that you've ever recorded. Um,
Mhm.
but you shouldn't. I'm just telling you, but you shouldn't. But this was one of those guys that was like that. And so Pro Tools though was still in its infancy in that you couldn't record to it yet because it was only two tracks. So we were recording to a Sony 3348 digital recording reel to reel machine, which was half-inch tape and 48 tracks of digital. And again, killer band, all set to go. And God, we were in the studio for like a week recording this band. And the process was we would record it, and then every night the one of the three guys that knew Pro Tools would come in every night and transfer all the tracks from the Sony digital machine, two tracks at a time, into this new Pro Tools software. And because it was 48 tracks, it would take him like all night. So
Mhm.
he'd be the night shift. And the whole idea of this was to the producers that so he could fix stuff. But
Mhm.
again, we have this like killer band in, and I'll never forget like how many times we'd be like sitting over the minutia of a sound. These were the days where you'd spend 2 days on a snare, just on a snare drum sound alone.
Wow.
And so basically the band was living in the lounge because we'd never need them all together. So
Mhm.
they're just, ordering in and watching cable. And so I remember like, getting everything dialed in and like, okay, oh, this had taken like all afternoon. And these guys have been sitting all day and like, okay, come in, they're ready. And like, and we start playing a little bit. And like right away, the producer's like, um, the snare sounds completely wrong. Sorry, guys. I'll let, and then it's like basically start over. And that was the whole record. And it's like, here these guys are just like dying. If you've
Mhm.
ever been in a studio with musicians, the last thing you ever want them to do is sit and do
Mhm.
nothing.
Mhm.
That's why drugs were invented, is for recording sessions. Because it's just like, because you're doing, what else? Oh, there's nothing to do, so let me not feel anything.
Mm.
So, yeah, that was how the whole record went. It probably never even came out. So that was, that was that record. Then in the exact same room, completely different day, Lena Horne in doing vocals, just like just nailing it, and you're just like, you're in the presence of royalty, right?
Mhm.
And it's just like, stories and laughs and, just like the best session ever. The elegance of that, and then the brutality of the other thing. And it was
Mhm.
just like, again, here's how to make a record, here's not how to make a record. And then my,
Mhm.
my version of that, the middle of those two things is fast forward. I have one of my studios here in town in New York. I'm doing this a record with this singer from New Orleans, piano player. And she's one of these girls where sits down and plays and sings, and you just everything stops. It's just like, whoa.
Mhm.
And we've been working on this record for a while. And she comes in that day, and I have the mic set up, because she's doing piano and vocals live. And I have everything set and all the settings set. And she's like, something's wrong with the microphone. And I'm like, check in. And it's like, no, no, nope, nothing. And she's like, no, it doesn't sound right. And I'm like looking around, and I'm just like, so I just get on the talkback mic. It's like, we're leaving, get your coat. It's like, what? You know, we're in a recording session. So we're leaving, get your coat. So jump in a cab. I go to a pool hall. We play a couple games of pool. She beats me like uh 2 games to 1, something like that. It's like, we go back to the studio. She takes off her coat, sits down at the piano, plays and records, says nothing about the microphone. It's like, and that's how you do it, kids. I hope I don't have to explain to you what happened there, but it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you teach that in recording school?
you don't at all. I mean, as when I talk to, people coming up and stuff, I said, it's crazy how much how the role has changed. I mean, a big part of your producer skills is to know exactly the right time to do a Starbucks run.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Because it's
mhm,
because it's or even just I mean, there's just so many levels to it. It's like, okay, so we're gonna be in the studio today, and we need to record 4 songs. Like, which song do we do first? We do either the the fastest song or the hardest song first, because we're gonna need all our energy for that.
mhm,
So you do that, you knock that one out, then you do what the other songs. It doesn't matter except for one factor. So um, the lunch break. When the lunch break, you always want to do the ballad after a lunch break, because what happens is your all the blood in your brain is now in your stomach digesting what you just ate. So you're
mhm,
groggy, you're
mhm.
sleepy, you're chill. This is the time for that, you know 78 beats per minute, and everyone's just kind of like, we don't, they can play a little behind the beat, because that's the feel we want. Those are the
Uh-huh,
things that are really helpful to know.
right.
Because and so zoom out, because, like, by God, if you did that hardest song after lunch, the day is trashed, because everyone's going to get really freaked out, because they're not nailing this. They don't know why, because they forgot that, like, they have no blood in their brain, because it's all in their stomach. So they're at diminished capacity. You know, there's so many little things like that.
That's beautiful. So, are you gonna put all this in the book so future generations of engineers and
I'm
producers will,
trying. See, what's interesting about the book, I've been working on it for way longer than I planned, because the original idea about it was, when I started out, I kept a journal of my sessions, and
mhm,
um and I kept it up to like 10,000 and like 5 decimal points past 10,000. This is before that whole Malcolm Gladwell thing.
wow,
And
okay,
so I have and it written all in longhand, like as if it was like the Revolutionary War or something.
mhm,
And so I have a whole pile of journals. And so it was like, the idea was like, I'm gonna like pull stories from these sessions, so from these journals.
mhm,
And I started doing that. But as you might get a feel for, it's like, I'm definitely a little bit of a deep thinker. And so it just started to kind of go in all these different ways of uh, so you think, you go into the book and you think you know what it's going to be, but you learn quite quickly that you have no idea what it's going to be. And then you get very down on yourself and depressed, and you're like, oh, maybe I'm just not supposed to do this. And then you start then you just have to come to realization. You have to like let go of what you think it's going to be, and you just have to write. And you just have to, so you make a folder on your desktop that just says writing, and you just, every time you write, you just throw it in that folder, and it will the book the shape of the book will be determined by whoever's editing it.
mhm,
Because I didn't want it, because the stories are fun, but the one real issue with that is that the stories have far less significance if the real names are not used. And it's like, do I want to be sued for the rest of my life? That's a
yeah,
question. And people are like, oh, use like something. It's like, that's lame. So then, then it's like, okay, well, then do I talk about how I, how I think of sessions, and it's like, um, you know, like the process, it's like, is it more like is it a how to? It's like, it's not going to be a technical guide because I'm not a technical person. I don't think. I mean, I use all this stuff, but I'm not a techie.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm not.
Mhm. Mhm.
My idea of a techie is learned to use hand tools when I was a kid because my dad was a mechanic. That's my level of techie,
Sure.
you know. But don't ask me about your server. I don't know anything about that.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So,
Gotcha.
um, but I don't know what the book's really gonna be like.
Mm.
The only thing I'm like adamant about is that I want a like actual hardcover book. I don't want to just put out a PDF myself. I'm not if I that's not I'm never going to do that. That's not what
Mm.
this is going to be.
Mm. Mm.
Um um but and what's interesting, the a couple of years ago I was asked by one of the companies I work with to be do a speaking tour for them. And I was like, "Okay, I've used some of your stuff, but I'm not, like no, we actually just want you to talk about your career." And, being deathly afraid of public speaking, I was like, "Yes, I'll do it. Ah, yeah, okay." I had 5 months to figure it out, and but I was just like, I have to do this. I have to do it, and I never practiced 'cause I don't practice any ever. I wing it. I wing it all the time, actually. But what helped me immensely was that I figured out what this speaking tour could do for me. It's like obviously, well, it'll help me jump get so, get rid of this fear, but more importantly, this will be research for my book because the people that are going to be in this audience are going to be the customers for that book. So
Sure.
let me use this as like research to
Mhm.
figure out
Mhm.
what works and doesn't work. So once I
Mhm.
got my head around that,
Mhm.
it just made it like any other job. You know what I mean? Because everyone
Yeah.
knew, my friends that knew about this were like, just let us know we can help how to, we'll help practice, and I didn't
Mhm.
reach out to any of them. And
Mhm.
because I just did it. And I mean, the first one, I was basically like bolted myself to a lectern and then I hope there's no video of that ever. But it got better as it went along. I really almost like turned it into like a stand-up routine. Like because I would start it out being like, you know, it's like I know most of you are here because of my band, The Cure. We won't be playing any of those songs tonight, so I just want to put that out there. And that would always get a chuckle because I get people making a comment like that at least 3 times a day, every day of the year, like, "Oh, Robert Smith." So, it's the only reason why I use the middle initial is because of
Yeah,
that.
it's somebody else in there.
Yeah, because it's just like, and he still gets. I mean, I still see stuff where it's just like those 3 things were mine. Uh, but yeah, but again, it was good. It worked out well, thankfully.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting, like, so I have a background in product, right? So the
Mhm.
the product, like, one thing in product is you interact with your customers or potential
Mhm.
customers to the degree to which you can articulate their problems better than they can because you've spoken
Yeah.
to enough of them, right? And earlier when you're talking about your experiences working with musicians, they come in, you've done this, probably far more times than any of them have,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Doing sessions every day.
Mhm.
Um, so you're able to speak to that. And then similarly, as you go out and credit to you for, terrified of public speaking and going out on a public speaking tour.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then, going on that, and then you're able to ascertain what has traction with the
Mhm.
audience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was cool.
Hmm.
It was very cool.
So how many stops did you do with that?
It wasn't a ton. It was like 5 or something, but, I
Okay.
mean, it might, when I
Yeah.
agreed to it, even if I even agreeing to one was going to give me a panic attack. So yeah, it was, yeah, crazy days.
Well, that's great. Well, Robert, thanks so much for meeting with me.
Yeah, my
You're
pleasure.
actually the guest number 1.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's cool. All
Yeah.
right.
So
All
thank
right.
you.
Wow.
Thanks for coming back after the technical flub the other day,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no. No, all good. All good.
I appreciate it. And,
Yeah.
so we should do at the end, so, for people who wanna work with you, how do they reach you?
Um, well, I used to say go to my website, but my website is currently under construction. But you can go on there just to find my contact stuff, which is defyrecordings.com.
Okay.
I'm everywhere as that. So Instagram, Defy Recordings, Facebook, Defy Recordings.
Okay.
What else? Uh, Twitter. If anyone
You're on
even
Twitter
goes to that anymore.
Okay.
Not on my, I'm not on MySpace as Defy Recordings though. So don't look for me on there. So I still get like 5 requests a year for friend connection. I'm like,
On
what?
MySpace?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
still up? I
I,
didn't notice.
I haven't logged in like 16 years. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, and it's DeFi, so I also have a Web3 background, so it's not DEFI, it's DEFY.
Yeah, DFY, yes. Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Good, good. Well, thank you so much. What a
Yeah,
pleasure,
yeah,
and
no, please.
what a
It was
blast to
fun.
chat with
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So always fun.